Do you remember those stories from when you were a kid? You know, the ones that end, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, let me tell you, that is nothing like the poetry of Thomas Hardy. This is a poet that seems to bask in bleakness. Far from being an out-and-out love fest, Neutral Tones explores the death of love, the end of the relationship, and the lingering resentment that attends it. And in this poem, you're going to meet a narrator who believes that misery follows love just as surely as night follows day. Now, like a lot of Hardy's literary output, Neutral Tones is shot through with a great bleakness or pessimism. One of Hardy's most famous novels, for instance, Tess the D'Urbervilles, has a very gloomy ending, and the novel's not exactly a bucket of chuckles all the way through either. You've got this poor girl Tess treated abysmally by the two men in her life, Alec and Angel. And if you're studying this poem for an exam which requires you to look at contextual factors, then that is well worth bearing in mind. As is the belief amongst a lot of critics that this poem, with its very jaundiced, cynical attitude to love, reflects some of the misery Thomas Hardy himself felt in his own romantic entanglements as a lad. So let's see what we can winkle out of the title first off. Neutral Tones. Well, this title is ambiguous. There's a double meaning to it. On the one hand, it can refer to the poem's winter setting, where you've got this very bleached out or neutral colour palette for that winter's day. However, it can also allude to the two lovers and their lack of emotion, lack of feeling. There's an emotional neutrality between them, where they're trying not to convey any feeling through their actions or expressions. Stanza 1 kicks off with a sweet dollop of pathetic fallacy. This is where the writer uses weather or setting to help create a mood or to reflect a certain character's feelings. We've all read a ghost story, haven't we, that starts on a dark and stormy night, because of course darkness creates a sinister mood very well suited to tales of terror. In Hardy's poem Neutral Tones, the winter setting, aided by words like white and grey and ash, help capture a sense of decay, with that death in the landscape mirroring the death in the lover's relationship. There's your pathetic fallacy. White and grey are very dull colours, aren't they? They're devoid of colour or vibrancy, and that reflects the lack of passion or colour or vitality in the relationship. And the inclusion of the word ash is very crafty as well. Yes, an ash is a kind of tree, but ash is also the remnants of a fire, implying that a once great passion in this relationship has burned away to nothing. Carrying on with stanza 1, you get that great metaphor, or I think it's a simile, about how the sun is white as if it's been chidden of God, basically told off by God. And again, here we're getting a suggestion of a once great passion or rage that's kind of burned itself out and ruined the relationship. You've also got the sibilance, that's like a posh term for the alliteration of the S sound, the sibilance of starving sod, which arguably creates a very bitter tone reflecting the lover's feelings here. One of my favourite images in the poem comes in stanza 2, lines 5 and 6. Your eyes on me were as eyes that rove over tedious riddles of years ago. Now, if you're ever sitting in a pub or a cafe and you keep your old ears flapping, you'll hear some very interesting conversations on this topic. I tell you, if I had £1 for every time I heard some bloke weeping into his beer, giving it, "I'll never understand women," you know, I'd have about £5. All right, it doesn't happen that often, but you know, men often complain that they don't understand women. And similarly, I've been in pubs and I've heard this conversation where some girl says something like, "I don't get Gary. He says he loves me, then he sleeps with Sharon." So that image of somebody as a tedious riddle conveys the idea that she now finds the complexity of his character tiresome. And I'm sure at one point she found it very attractive. You know, we're often drawn to mysterious, complex characters with depth in them. That can be quite an attractive trait in a prospective partner. But do you know what? Sometimes trying to work out that character, that personality, it just becomes tiresome. It's a struggle, and there seems to be very little reward for your efforts. Stanza 3 is a party bag of imagery as well. You've got the idea of the deadest smile. And that metaphor beautifully captures the lack of feeling, the lack of emotion that this woman has for the narrator. It telegraphs a sort of emotional neutrality. The word dead has connotations of coldness, of lifelessness, which is a beautiful way for reflecting how she feels about him. You've also got a great simile which links her smile of bitterness to an ominous bird a-wing. Ominous, which I guess comes from the word omen, suggests a sign of bad things to come. This is an image of foreboding, deepening that sense of bleakness that's pervading the poem. Hardy's basically saying here, love stinks, and it's about to get stinkier. There's more A-list imagery in stanza 4. You've got the idea that love rings with wrongs, and that emphasises the narrator's belief that relationships are fraught with injustice and mistreatment. You've got the alliteration there, the rings of wrongs, that R sound captures very nicely the narrator's bitter tones. Plus, to ring something means to kind of twist it out, and that twisting might allude to the pain that love can create. The narrator's basically explaining in stanza 4 that he's learned the hard way that love hurts, and the origins of this harsh lesson, the kind of ground zero for this realisation, was this lover that he parted from on that winter scene all that time ago. Stanza 4 also reveals the poem's cyclic structure, because we see a return to the same scene and setting as we had in stanza 1. We've even got another reference to an angry god. We've got a reference to a god-cursed son, which echoes the chidden of God, the son chidden of God in stanza 1. Now, the reason I think that Hardy employs this structure is to highlight the dispiriting cycle that he sees in love, with relationships inevitably eroding, inevitably breaking down. That cyclic structure conveys to me that the misery inherent in love is inescapable. You think love's all happy ever after? Pah, I'm sure Hardy would say. Pah, save it for the fairy tales. Love will give way to nothingness over time, again and again. A few final words on this poem. You've got the fixed ABBA rhyme scheme, and that echoes the poem's cyclic structure, because it also suggests that the breakdown of a relationship is sort of fixed or inescapable. And if you want to be a really clever Trevor, you can ask yourself, just how neutral are these lovers and their emotions? Perhaps the feelings that they're experiencing are not as neutral as they initially appear. For instance, we've got those images of the angry gods suggesting a great passion has burned out. And you've also got what I'd call energetic verbs suggesting of great energy. I think you've got rove and swept. Now, there's a pace and energy there that's perhaps at odds with the idea of neutrality. Also, stanza 1, you've got the idea of the starving sod, sod being turf. Well, starving is quite a painful sensation, not a neutral one. And so then, with our top of the class hat on, we can undermine the poem's assertion to neutral feelings, because there's a restless undercurrent to this poem which suggests lingering feelings. We're nearly there. Conclusions. Some of the poetic techniques that this poem employs. On the language side, you've got metaphors and similes, pathetic fallacy, alliteration, and some powerful verbs and adjectives. In terms of structure, you've got that fixed ABBA rhyme scheme. For some reason, I can't get Dancing Queen out of my head right now. And you've also got that cyclic structure to the poem too. An overview of the whole poem. I'll quit my yapping for a minute. You can have a go up at this, read through it, summarise everything we talked about. And if you're expected to compare Hardy's neutral tones with other poems on the theme of love or relationships, I've just winkled out a few key ideas about what this poem says about romantic love. Feast your eyes for a few seconds. And there you have it, folks. Thomas Hardy, not exactly the Prince of Perky, explores the death of a relationship in neutral tones.